If you're anything like me, the minute that you learned that an upcoming performance was moved virtually, you were filled with a panic response. You were instantly filled with dread at this idea of sitting in a room with a camera for hours, just waiting for that perfect take that seems farther and farther away every time you try. Not everyone feels this way. In fact, some people largely prefer the flexibility and versatility of a recorded performance. But for some, the idea of performing for an unblinking camera that captures everything is enough to trigger even the worst of anxiety. Music performance anxiety, or MPA, has been a vice in the performing arts world for as long as we can recall. Chopin himself admitted to avoiding performances due to this extreme stress and nerves. He said, "I am not fit to give concerts. The audience intimidates me. I feel choked by its breath, paralyzed by its curious glances, struck dumb by all those strange faces." Recent surveys have revealed that over 20% of musicians struggle with some form of performance anxiety. According to a recent study, over a fifth of music conservatory students even choose to abandon their studies due to music performance anxiety. Since this is so persistent and affects so many teachers, performers, and students, we should all be equipped to understand the basis of anxiety and how to handle it. So first and foremost, what is anxiety? Anxiety is the body's natural response to stress. However, many individuals experience anxiety at a level that interferes with the rest of their lives. According to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness, with over 18% of the population suffering from a form of an anxiety disorder. Anxiety stems from excessive, often irrational fear and can produce a variety of harmful side effects, including severe responses such as hyperventilation, chest pain, and panic attacks. Anxiety is at the root of most psychological disorders, including music performance anxiety. Let's start by looking at the biological basis of anxiety. Anxiety is the survival response, first and foremost. Charles Darwin believed that both humans and animals responded to dangerous stimuli with a series of physiological responses, which have become commonly known as fight or flight response. The presence of dangerous stimuli causes this balance in the brain to be disrupted. The sympathetic branch of the nervous system responds by preparing the body for danger. This causes an acceleration of heart rate, dilation or constriction of blood vessels, pupil dilation, and in extreme circumstances, even loss of vision or hyperventilation. This body's response to anxiety causes a disruption in healthy neurotransmitter function. Anxiety also has a very psychological basis as well. Performance anxiety, and specifically, is a manifestation of social anxiety disorder. Social anxiety is specifically the fear of being judged in a negative manner by others, and often leads to feelings of self-consciousness, inadequacy, humiliation, and depression. Anxiety and social anxiety situations is usually limited to the experiences which trigger anxiety, such as performing on stage. Individuals might not have anxiety in other areas of life, or they might also as well, but for the most part, this specific kind of anxiety is limited to the things that trigger that anxiety. Most researchers believe that social anxiety is caused by a combination of environmental factors, inherited traits, and physical abnormalities. Environmental factors include things such as toxic previous experiences, such as family conflict, abuse, or bullying. It's uncertain if anxiety disorders can be genetically traced, but children who have a parent with anxiety are much more unlikely to develop a disorder through learning that behavior and the responses from the parent. Physical abnormalities such as hormonal imbalance in the brain can also increase presence of anxiety, including music performance anxiety. So then, what is music performance anxiety specifically? Music performance anxiety is the experience of persisting, distressful apprehension about and/or actual impairment of performance skills in a public context, to a degree unwarranted given the individual's musical aptitude, training, and level of preparation. Music performance anxiety does not discriminate based on age or experience, and it's often a lifelong struggle. Musicians of all levels and all ages have reported struggling with this anxiety. It causes lower levels of satisfaction in music, and it is not something that can be easily overcome by a set of steps. It's often a lifelong struggle, and musicians must learn how to manage it and adapt to it as best for them, rather than treat it as a hurdle that must be overcome before they can have a satisfying career. There's no one cause of music performance anxiety, and a lot of factors contribute to significant anxiety, including personal history, preparation for the performance, and the way that one views the self. Everyone is affected differently based on past experiences, mental health, and level of musical ability. One thing that might affect anxiety is a personal or genetic predisposition to anxiety. If a musician already has been diagnosed with a general anxiety or social anxiety disorder, it's much easier for them to be affected by music performance anxiety as well. Education and upbringing also has something to do with how the individual responds to anxiety. If the teacher, especially teachers at a young age, did a good job of framing performances in a positive light, then it's likely as an adult that they will also view performing positively. However, on the other hand, if there's a history of unsuccessful performing experiences, again, especially at a young age, the musician is far more likely to be predisposed to viewing performances as a negative experience. This also goes into how performance was viewed in the home. If they grew up with parents who are very encouraging about performance, they might want to continue doing that and feel more positively about it. However, if performance was always something that was heavily criticized, or there were a lot of nerves being expressed in the household that one grew up in, there's also a likelihood that a lot more anxiety will result when the individual is exposed to performing as an adult. Another thing that can cause significant anxiety is inadequate preparation. If the music's not thoroughly learned, it's more likely that they will face more nervousness and uncertainty, especially when they are expected to have the music memorized for the performance. Insufficient time in rehearsals can also lead to more apprehension about a performance. This greatly affects orchestra musicians who are expected to learn and perfect music in a really short time period without many rehearsals, and often must rely on sight reading in order to succeed. A 2010 survey found that inadequate performance was the number one reason behind music performance anxiety of conservatory students. Another thing that can cause significant anxiety is pressure from self. Music is a very demanding field that deals with a lot of outside opinions and judgments. This can be easy to internalize, often causing negative self-talk and unrealistic expectations. The same survey, as mentioned before, reveals that pressure from self is the number 2 reason behind high levels of anxiety. This is especially evident in individuals who struggle with perfectionism, who tend to dismiss an entire performance if there's just a single mistake. Perfectionism is a common vice among musicians, as they often feel like they owe it to the audience to deliver a perfect performance. However, this fear of making mistakes often only leads to making more mistakes, and it kind of snowballs from there. Negative self-talk continues and reinforces the idea that performance is worthy of fear and apprehension, which leads to increased anxiety whenever the individual is exposed to a performing experience. The main reason why music performance anxiety is a concern in the musical community is due to its harmful effects on the performance. Performing on an instrument requires precise control over fine motor skills, as well as great cognitive awareness, especially when it comes to memorization or coordinating with other musicians. Musicians should portray confidence while on stage, but trembling and excess muscular tension can prevent them from executing the skills required in order to perform excellently on their instruments. Anxiety disrupts the musician's control over the technical abilities to play an instrument with proficient mastery. As a result, it's difficult for the musician to have a positive performing experience. Music performance anxiety is caused by the activation of the brain's emergency system, which activates the sympathetic branch of the nervous system and increases the flow of adrenaline into the bloodstream. This can lead to a number of different physiological effects. First of which is hyperventilation, which is where the individual breathes more than is considered to be healthy. This disrupts the normal diffusion of oxygen into the tissues of the body. It causes trembling, heart palpitations, chest pain, and disturbances in breathing. The breathing pattern becomes more irregular, especially causes problems for a musician whose instrument requires proper breath support. This can also cause vasoconstriction or narrowing of the blood vessels, which impairs the body's circulation and reduces the feeling in the body, especially in the extremities, which really disrupts the precision of movement and that fine motor skills that are required to play instruments well. This also Another physiological response that the body has is also an increase in heart rate, which is done to prepare the body for danger. But this increase in heart rate can lead to feeling out of control a lot of times when on stage. It also causes a disruption in digestion, which causes this feeling of butterflies that many performers mention. When under distress, the body also activates a cooling system. It causes the body to sweat more than necessary, and it causes the extremities to feel cool, and numb. This is the clammy hand sensation that many musicians report occurring before a performance. It disrupts those fine motor skills that are required in order to perform well. It causes high levels of autonomic arousal, which fatigue the musicians. It causes issues in long performances in which the musician is supposed to be at peak performance without extended breaks to recover. Full hour-long solo recitals or long orchestral concerts can be exhausting when you're at this high level of arousal the whole time. This high level of arousal also increases the musician's internal tempo, which can cause them to feel out of control and play a lot faster than rehearsed. This also causes increased muscle activity and joint stiffness, which alters the fine motor skills once again, and if it persists, could lead to the development of muscle-related injuries such as tendonitis. There's also a number of psychological effects that alter the performance as well. As performance is such a mental practice, performing well has just as much to do with cognitive awareness and control. Artistic expression requires focus and high-order associative functions. Anxiety impairs cognitive function. When anxious, the musician finds it much more difficult to focus on the art of making music, which can lead to various problems that pose a threat to the musical experience, including poor interpretation of the music, memory problems, and distorted thoughts. Additionally, after a slip-up, whether just a small mistake or a major memory slip, it's very difficult for an anxious musician to continue going on without faltering anymore. This also can often cause an increase in focus on audience opinions. Increase of anxiety as the result of a presence of an audience causes the musician to shift attention from making music to task-irrelevant cues. The musician can become way too focused on the audience's perception and lose sight of the task taking place. Fear of a negative evaluation can cause more severe anxiety to occur, and when the performer focuses on the audience's perceptions, they cannot sufficiently engage in the music and often make more results. Additionally, this can even result on the musician catastrophizing as soon as they make a mistake, which unfortunately tends to lead to more mistakes due to an altered state of focus. This is especially the case in individuals who struggle with perfectionism, which causes excessive preoccupation with mistakes, incessant doubts about one's actions, and negative response to imperfections or failures. Perfectionists use much energy when they engage in evaluative behaviors, and as a result have less energy to focus on the performance, allowing the stress of evaluation to take precedence over the art of making music. Another thing that anxiety affects is dread. It is entirely possible for anxiety to develop several days prior and to continue to grow until the performance is over. This causes a number of unpleasant side effects from the musician, including stress, apprehension, insecurity, and dread. It is possible that this is the brain's way of bracing itself for the possibility of a negative or humiliating experience, but it causes much unpleasantness for the musician for the time being, especially the time leading up to the actual performance. However, most of this research is broad or pertains mostly to traditional performance, or in other words, in performances in front of an audience, on some kind of stage, and so on. Those of us who are familiar with recording know that some level of anxiety is still present. So how are we supposed to adapt to this? Last fall, during the midst of socially distanced learning, I thought about this idea of recording performances a lot and how anxiety might influence it. For a research project, I decided to study up on this concept, as there is not much research out there on performance anxiety as it relates specifically to recordings. Most of it is all about being in front of an audience, but we all know it still exists, even if it's different. So I posed this question: is there a difference between music performance anxiety and live performance versus recorded performance? We are still heavily relying on recording these days, and it's really important to consider how we are still being affected. Look at this conference, for example. We're still relying on a lot of pre-recorded means of delivery a lot of the time, and we know that anxiety is still going to affect it. So how is music performance anxiety continuing to affect this changing landscape? Last fall, I wanted to get some feedback about how other musicians feel about performing virtually versus performing live. So I decided to create a survey just to ask opinions about how people felt about the difference of playing either option, about how anxiety transpired as a result, and which they preferred. I surveyed music students at both the undergraduate and graduate level and had 39 responders over 7 multiple choice questions. I found the responses to be very illuminating, and I want to quickly go through all of these. First, I asked, on a scale from 1 to 5, how much do you struggle with anxiety when performing? Most people answered a 3 or a 4, which I found to be very expected. Most people have some level of anxiety when they perform. It's very rare that people have little to no anxiety when performing. Second, I asked, do you find yourself experiencing more or less anxiety if you must pre-record rather than record live? These results were very split, with most people saying that they experienced less or slightly less anxiety when it is pre-recorded. When I asked several classmates and acquaintances why they chose this, the responses were usually that you could do it again. Overall, this contributed to less overall anxiety before the fact. However, there's still over a quarter of people that experience more anxiety when they must pre-record. Next, I asked, do you feel as if you perform better or worse for a recording as opposed to live? Again, this was very split, although most agreed that they performed better. However, over a third of people said that they performed worse, even with this option of performing it over and over again for the recording. Next, I asked, how much of an effect do you feel like nerves have on your performance when playing live? Over half said that nerves had a moderate effect on their performance. Then I posed this question towards recording, asking how much of an effect do you feel like nerves have on your performance when filming or recording? In this instance, the a little and a moderate amount bars are about flipped. Most people agree that they have a little anxiety when recording as opposed to a moderate amount. Notice that the same amount of people still said that they had a lot or a great deal or none or all, but about that middle of the road, most people generally have a little bit less anxiety when they're going to film. I feel like these last 2 questions are the most illuminating, at least for me. I asked, which do you get more satisfaction from, live performance or recording sessions? Over 80% of people agree that live performances are more satisfying than recording sessions. Even though most agreed that live performances had more anxiety, almost everyone agreed that live performance has more satisfaction. Lastly, I asked, if you had to choose, which would you prefer, live performance or pre-recorded? Again, the overwhelming majority chooses to perform live, same as the last question. Even though there's an increase in anxiety when it comes to performing live, time and time again, this is still the mode of delivery that most people are continuing to rely on and choose. So why is this? The results were fairly split, but generally respondents stated that they experienced less anxiety when recording as opposed to performing live. The majority stated that they had a little anxiety when recording and a moderate amount when performing live. However, half of responders said that they performed worse as opposed to live, while the other half disagrees. Lastly, I found even though most responders said that they would have moderately less anxiety if they were recording, the vast majority still says that they would prefer giving a live performance. 33 out of 39 performers said that they both got more satisfaction out of a live performance and would choose to perform live if they were given the choice. I didn't really think any of this was surprising. It makes sense that a lot of this was split, as a lot of people have different experiences and view different performance methods differently. At a first glance, it would appear that recording performances is better. Most reported that there's slightly less anxiety when recording is an option for a performance. But the minute you go on and see that most people get more satisfaction from live performances and would choose live performances, kind of throws a wrench in things and makes it a little bit more confusing. It's interesting to note that most responders still place live performances as being more satisfying, even if it causes greater anxiety. Perhaps this difficulty of the live performance creates a higher satisfaction and draws more musicians to this method as a result. There's definitely some sense of dread when it comes to recordings, otherwise, they'd be more popular. So, why is there so much dread surrounding pre recorded performances? Why do people have more satisfaction for live performances? And what can we do to help this? I think one reason that there's so much dread surrounding recorded performances is the same thing that people said causes them less anxiety. You can do it over and over again. When there's this expectation of being able to do it repetitively, we assume that means perfection. We assume that you must film over and over until you get a good enough video or you eventually just decide enough is enough. There's not this one and done kind of satisfaction for live performances. We just keep doing it over and over as anxiety and frustration continues to build, and we feel like that perfect take is just so far away and we're never going to get there. This causes so much frustration and angst and anxiety and leads to this dread when leading up to recording. But I don't think it has to be that way. I think there's a lot of different strategies that we can implement that can drastically help both students and performers find greater satisfaction from performing virtually and will choose to do it more and feel less dread when they have to do it. The first way to help recording go smoother is by preparation. As we talked about before, inadequate preparation is one of the leading causes of anxiety. So it comes down to this: just simply don't film until you're ready. Make sure you're adequately prepared before filming. Don't use the recording experience to fine-tune or practice passages. And also be realistic. Set achievable expectations given the level of preparation. If you've only reached a certain level of a piece, do not expect the recording to go smoother. Unfortunately, sometimes we have to record before we're ready if it's an audition or a jury, and sometimes we just don't get to be as prepared as we want. It happens. It's something we're all used to. Practicing and still never feeling like we get to that level we want. So when we go into the time of recording, we need to be realistic about this. We need to be able to have a plan of success so that we achieve what we're capable of, but don't hold ourselves to a higher standard than we're able to meet. Don't compare your recording to a famous professional. If you're not at that level, it's okay. But you need to feel comfortable with where you are and not feel like you're going to use this recording time to try to grow your abilities drastically. Feel comfortable with your tempo and the flow of the music before you even turn on the camera. Don't use each take to practice a complete run-through. Do this prior to the day. If you're not sure you can run through, if you have to be memorized, make sure you're practicing running through by memory before you sit down for your actual day of recording. Also, another thing that goes into preparation is repertoire selection. Don't try to perform repertoire far above your skill level when it comes to this. Learning pieces that are too difficult can lead to increased anxiety because it can cause this inadequate preparation and this feeling of not being good enough. So teachers, when this comes to repertoire selection, it's very important to be intentional about choosing repertoire that is a good fit for the student's level, something that pushes them, but something that they're going to find success in. If you're trying to perform things that you're not finding success in your practice, the performing experience is going to be very frustrating because you're not going to feel like you have achieved enough by the time you turn on the camera. Make sure that you've done everything you can with the piece before you record, but once you get to that time of recording, make peace with what you've achieved. Let it go, make peace with where you are, and turn on the camera and just try to capture a good representation of the work that you've done. Not the work that you feel like you should do. Try to represent well the work that you have done on the piece, and let that be it. Another thing that will help you prepare is practicing performance rituals. Practice every single aspect of the day of performance. We do this a lot when we think of live performances and recitals, but we don't really often think of this when it comes to recording. We kind of just assume we're going to go about our day, take a tripod with us, and then at some point we'll set up and record. But it's very important that we treat the day of recording the same that we would a live performance, and that we practice every aspect of the day of performance. Have a set plan to feel at ease. Know when you're going to wake up, what you're going to eat, how you will spend your time prior to recording, and so on. Do you know when you're going to get to the venue? Do you know when you're going to leave the thing you have to do before? Do you know what else you're going to have to do that day? Try to practice this routine in advance if you're able to, so that your body feels comfortable with it. If you know you're going to go straight from class to a performance venue, try to practice that transition. Try to feel very comfortable so that your body doesn't feel like there's any surprises that you are throwing in the way. Limit as many variables as possible to put you at ease. If your body knows what to expect, it'll cue less anxiety. Try to stick to your usual routine. If there's a time that you like to wake up in the morning, try to stick to that as closely as possible. Try to make sure you get a lot of sleep. Eat good foods, especially carbs the morning of, will very much help you feel more prepared when you do it. Don't try to sway your schedule drastically. If you're used to waking up earlier in the day, trying to force yourself to sleep in and have a lazy morning might actually cue more anxiety. It's very important to do what your body is comfortable with, because our bodies like routine. And if we try to stick to a routine that we know we're comfortable with, less anxiety will be incurred as a result. Another thing that really helps when it comes to recording is something I like to call the 3-take rule. It's a very simple principle. Only give yourself a few tries to get a complete take. It doesn't have to be 3 takes. It can be any number that works for you. But you only record a certain number of times. Usually 3 for me is the magic number, because usually one of the first 3 recordings is the best and is one of the ones I usually end up using. Usually it's the second one. The first one kind of helps me shake out all the jitters. The second one really helps me sink into it. And the third one, sometimes I'm a little tired. But usually one of those first 3 recordings is the best. Don't stop the camera every single time you make a mistake. Don't overthink each try. Recording over and over usually leads to fatigue, frustration, and exhaustion. Don't hyperanalyze every take, and don't stop and listen back until after you're finished. If you stop after each take, listen to it, and then think in your mind of all the things you want to change before the next take, it's going to create so much anxiety when you go to perform. Just let yourself do it 3 times, then afterwards, you can listen back and decide which of the takes is the best. This just prevents a lot of undue stress and fatigue and frustration that can come from sitting in a room trying to go over and over and over again until you feel it's good enough. If you set a limit of the amount of times to do it, then it kind of creates a peace and allows you to just get the best ability that you can. One of the large issues with recording, as seen from how people answered on the survey, is that it's largely less satisfying than performing live. There's no live audience, there's no applause, there's no immediate satisfaction upon finishing. We don't have people coming up to us afterwards telling us about the good job we've done. We don't have this feeling that it's over and we're done. A lot of times we just move on to the next thing on our checklist. In order to enjoy recording more, we need to find ways to enjoy the experience. This can be done by setting rewards after. One way is through sharing the video with others, like friends or family who you know will enjoy it. Don't just record a video that you think will be critiqued. If it's for a jury or an audition, there's more temptation to dread it. If you're sharing this video with someone you know will enjoy it, you might feel like you're creating music to be shared rather than trying to perform perfectly just to avoid harsh critique. If you know you're sharing this music for enjoyment, you might enjoy the process of making it more. This can be done by creating a YouTube channel or sharing it to different social media feeds. Open yourself to the opportunity to share music for music's sake. Sometimes we have to do recordings to fulfill a requirement for a class or an audition or anything, but it's really important that we still enjoy the process of making music and we still feel like we're sharing something beautiful with the world. It's really important that we find ways to continue to share it and not just feel like we're making music just for criticism. We should also reward ourselves once we're finished. We can reward ourselves with things like a night off, a favorite treat, a favorite self-care ritual, such as a massage or a hot bath or watching an episode of a television show, or something that feels rewarding, like you've accomplished something, the same way you would post-performance. Celebrate your success. Take some time to really enjoy what you have accomplished. Don't nitpick after it's over. Allow yourself to celebrate that you've accomplished something and that it's finished. When you enjoy something, you're going to perform better and dread it less. And when you know that this is something to be celebrated and something to be enjoyed, You will have a lot less anxiety that you bring into your experience because you know it's a positive thing. One of the leading causes of performance anxiety is negative self-talk. When the performer focuses on everything that could go wrong, it's more likely that those poor outcomes will happen as a result of a fixation on a negative. When performers get to very difficult passages and they get nervous as to whether they can do it or not, a lot of times those negative thoughts will seep in. And when that happens, a lot of times those passages don't go well as a result. Additionally, there are several poor thought processes that occur in many performers, including this all or nothing mindset, where the musician assumes that if they make a single mistake, it doesn't matter if the rest of the performance goes well. In their eyes, they've already failed. This is especially a problem when it comes to recording performances, because a lot of times when you make a mistake, you think, well, I should just start over because I can do it again. And then it leads to stopping and starting over and over and more mistakes, instead of just bouncing back from that single mistake and realizing that it's not the end of the world if something happens. This really needs to be looked at by intentionally removing negative patterns of thinking and replacing them with more positive thought processes. A lot of times when we say to speak positively to ourselves, we kind of brush it off as almost a cheesy thing to tell ourselves that we're doing well and to be proud of ourselves. And a lot of times we're very dismissive of that. But you can't simply push negative thoughts aside. Self-talk is really the most effective when you intentionally replace bad thoughts with good ones. You can't just tell the bad thoughts to go away. You have to have something in there. And it's best if you speak good things into yourself. Replace the fear of making mistakes with positive ideas that motivate you to achieve success. When you're performing, focus on what you're doing well, the growth that you've achieved, things that you're proud of, things that you never would have expected to be able to do that you're able to do. Focus on everything you've done, not the things that you're worried about. Find ways to speak positively to yourself. And I'm not telling you to just fill your head up with things that aren't motivating or feels unrealistic, but just find mantras to make yourself believe that you're truly working hard and putting good into what you're doing. Positive thoughts will yield better results and continue to reframe performing in a more positive light. This is going to lead to overall enjoyment of the experience and less dread, which is ultimately what we want. I know we all want perfect performances, but really the goal is to enjoy what we do, because living in fear of something that we love is not a way that any of us should want to live. We should enjoy the act of making music. We've all chosen to be musicians because we enjoy it. We shouldn't dread our experience. We should want to have more enjoyment. And speaking positively about the experience and what we're doing is one of the top ways to make ourselves enjoy the overall experience much more. The last way that anxiety can be relieved is by increased bodily awareness through breathing. Using meditative techniques such as breathing and control of thought patterns can lead to a more positive performing experience. We've already talked about how self-talk can reframe performing in a positive light, but practicing good breathing can help ourselves maintain control over our body. When we're performing and we're nervous and we're not paying attention to our breathing, a lot of times we hyperventilate, which means we're breathing very shallow and we're not getting enough oxygen in the body. That's what's leading to our tingly fingers and this loss of fine motor control. But when we practice deep breathing all the way from our core, all the way up, filling up our chest, we're going to fill our body with more oxygen and find that we have more control. If we try to avoid hyperventilating by breathing well, we're going to find that we have a lot more success in the performance because we have more control over our body. This is something that is hard to practice right when you get in the moment of performance, and it's really something that needs to be done on a daily basis through doing different activities. It's all about just promoting mindfulness. This can be done by practicing meditation, yoga, again, working on a lot of this bodily awareness and other activities on a daily basis. It's really important that we just take account of how our body is feeling. Just take time and do body scans throughout your day. Just take time to lay down and feel how different parts of your body feel. Is your jaw tight? Are your shoulders rigid? Are you hunched? If you really take the time to just feel how your body is feeling and let yourself breathe more freely, it'll really help when you get to performance, because it's hard to practice these things right when you show up on stage and you're nervous. But if you have a lot of good mental practices in your daily life, it's very easy for you to be able to incorporate this into your performance. And these things can really help, again, just because they help you maintain some feeling of control when you're on stage. You feel more grounded and more aware when you're in control of your breathing and in control of your mind. Performing music is always just inherently going to be challenging. We can implement every strategy and try everything in our power, but some of the pressures of performing are always going to be there. It's a part of our craft. It's a part of what we do. It's never easy. However, I don't think it has to be impossibly hard. I don't think we have to feel so pressured and so stressed all the time when we perform. I think there are ways out there to make it easier, especially when it comes to recording. It doesn't need to be something to be dreaded. There are numerous ways that we can make this easier for everyone involved. This presentation is really intended to be a starting point. You could deep dive into so many different areas of anxiety. There's so much more science behind it. And there's so many methods out there that have worked for so many people. And this is intended to be a starting point for performers and educators. I hope that this has inspired you to go out and research what works best for you and how to help anxiety that arises, whether it's your own or your students. It's something that so many of us deal with in the performing arts world, and I don't want it to be something that debilitates any of us. We all have something unique to share in the world of music, and we all have something that we bring to the craft. Performing doesn't have to be a make it or break it. It can be something that everyone can enjoy, regardless of age and level. And it can be something that everyone can find satisfaction in. I hope that you learned a lot from this presentation, and please let me know if you have any questions. This is something I'm really passionate with, and I cannot wait to bring it into my performing career and as well as my teaching career in the future, because I feel like it's something that's so very important. Thank you so much for listening.